You are listening to the Tri-Quarter Transmissions, episode 129. And now, here are Jeff and Ian.
Welcome back to DrawingTrek. This is our 37th episode, and today we're going to be covering the 39th issue of Star Trek Gold Key Comics entitled Prophet of Peace. I am Jeff Hulit, and here with me is the co-host of DrawingTrek, Mr. Ian Adams. How's it going, Mr. Ian Adams?
Hey, not too bad. It sure has been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, man, it's been quite a while, but we've been telling people that we'd be coming back, and here we are. So. And what an issue to come back to.
Yeah, 6 months out of sea, but now I'm home, and let's do this.
Yes. We've been looking forward to getting back to covering these comics, but before we start to cover this particular issue, I want to mention the fact that we do have a Patreon page. You can find it at patreon.com/the-Tri-Quarter-Transmissions, or by visiting our website and clicking the big orange Patreon link in the upper right-hand corner. So if you enjoy what we do here on DrawingTrek or any of our other Tri-Quarter Transmission shows, please consider joining our list of patrons and becoming a patron, of course. At any pledge level amount will give you instant access to our unedited and early release episodes. Often bonus material will be in there before and after. And of course, you get to hear all of our flubs and false starts and mess ups in the unedited versions. People seem to really like those.
They're a lot more fun to listen to than to do.
Yeah. There's been some embarrassing blunders that have gotten out there. So if anybody wants some comedic reasons to join Patreon, there you go. And we also hold monthly Trek chats exclusively for our Patreon supporters, usually attended by a good handful of our Tri-Quarter hosts. And we talk about just anything Trek. Bring your topics with you and throw them out, and we'll give them a run. And finally, we also have an exclusive pin that will be mailed to you after you sign up. So, and of course, it's any pledge level. So it's an exclusive pin just for you guys out there, and it's pretty cool. Everybody seems to really like it. So please consider joining our Patreon family. We would love to have you, and we appreciate everyone out there who's listening that's already a part of our family. We wouldn't be here without you guys' support. So thanks so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
So let's get into the 39th issue of Gold Key Comics, written by Mr. Arnold Drake once again. And this time we've actually got two artists credited on this one, Alberto Giolitti again, and Jose Delbo. I think this might be the first issue we're getting with some of his artwork in it. So that's going to be interesting to see.
I don't remember seeing his name in them.
No, me neither. It's usually just been Giolitti himself. And this was published in August of 1976. So, we're mid-70s here, rocketing towards the 80s and the reveal of the next generation down the road. But 22 pages, and of course, since it's TOS, it happened sometime during the 2260s. Miss anything, Ian?
No, I just wanted to say that it's kind of weird because the comic started in 69, but now we're getting into around our actual lifetimes.
Yeah.
As old as Star Trek.
I was almost 2 years old when this comic came out. October is my birth month, so I was getting there. I probably in another couple of years I'll have been old enough to read these.
Yeah.
Amazing to think about.
Going down to the drugstore because comic shops were still an almost unheard of thing.
Yeah, you can hit the old magazine rack and see what you can find. Or they might have had one of those spinning magazine racks by the door. I remember those too. That's where a lot of comics used to hide out. So great stuff. All right, well, you know what? Why don't we start talking about the cover like we always do, and there's no shortage of things to talk about with this cover. And of course, the cover price is 25 cents. Still, it went up a little while ago and hasn't gone up again since, but I'm sure that in the near future, we'll be seeing another price hike on these comics. I think this is a fairly standard Gold Key cover. I mean, it reminds me of so many of the ones before it, where it kind of tells some of the story of the issue. A bit of a teaser. I mean, we've got yet another disembodied floating head in space. Right. They seem to like those, and a disembodied floating brain that the head seems to be staring at. And the text on the cover is pretty scant. It just says "Frozen sleep in the depths of space." So what are your thoughts on this cover, Ian, and the depictions of not only the capsule in space, and you got two guys in red space suits, and the Enterprise looming in the background there.
It's like Enterprise-ish.
Yeah, it's a little more abstract Enterprise. It looks almost flatter.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's just a really straightforward cover. And this, I think, is George Wilson, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like his style.
Yeah. And like, I mean, so like there's the alien head in there, and we'll see them later on. The brain kind of makes sense with, once the story gets going. The capsule, like, I mean, we find the capsule in the first page, to not to skip ahead too far, but and it is interesting that the spacesuits actually have Spock and Kirk's names on the helmet.
They do,
which is kind of funny, because it's really important that we know which one on the cover is Spock and which one is Spock.
And it's amazing that they don't look anything like the original environmental suits from TOS.
Yeah, well, it was the 70s.
That's true. Things got a little. They look like skin tight.
Yeah, and in fact, I would say that they look closer to the ones that we saw, like in the movie, which was only like a year after this comic came out.
No, I thought the movie was 79. Wasn't? I have to look that up. I thought the motion picture was 79.
Oh man, I feel bad now. Like if I got that wrong, like Star Trek trivia is my superpower, and I can't even remember when a movie came out.
Well, at any rate, you are right. They do look kind of like the spacesuits from the motion picture and Wrath of Khan era a little bit more than they look like TOS ones. What else? So it looks like Kirk and Spock are retrieving this capsule with looks like almost like a hippie, a space hippie with glasses on, laying inside. And I guess by the text on the cover, we're supposed to think this person is some sort of some sort of a stasis or a cryogenic deep freeze. So not something we haven't seen in Star Trek before. So that's kind of a retread.
Right, but will this guy prove to be another Khan Noonien Singh?
We don't know, but we're going to find out here in a minute. We're going to jump into the teaser page. Anything else you want to say about the cover before we move on?
Nah, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. So
yeah, it is. Okay, so flipping open the cover and revealing what appears to be a different view of the cover. This is kind of maybe before the actions that are depicted on the cover. And we've got a couple of text boxes up top. One is part 1 of the Prophet of Peace, and there is a green box that does a little bit of a textual setup here. It says, "The man in the orbiting coffin had been out there for centuries!" Exclamation point. We're still doing tons of exclamation points in Gold
It's all exclamation points.
Everything has emphasis. Now Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise were given the honor of restoring life to that legendary figure, but it was a prize that would soon turn to ... deadly ashes.
Oh, those ashes are deadly.
Oh boy, are they. So this actually is where the names on the helmets help me to figure out who's saying what here, because it looks like almost there's 4 Enterprise crew members obviously on this page, and the Enterprise in the background, and it looks like they're all of them except for one person. I think Scotty's the only one who's not actually saying anything. Oh no, he is. All of them are saying something.
Yep.
Spock is talking about they should have used the tractor beam to get the body onto the ship, and this is kind of a strange scene because I think is Kirk's in the background, and I think it's McCoy. And what's this? Is Scotty the one in the? Yeah, Scotty's the one in the middle. And I don't know what order I'm supposed to read these bubbles in.
Right. I mean, I start with the top left and then just go right and then down,
Yeah.
like normal reading order, but it is kind of confusing because they seem to be kind of just speaking all at once.
Yeah, so that, there's some, Spock wanted to use the tractor beam, obviously, and the setup here is that they're retrieving this coffin from space, and it's being taped for an interplanetary viewing, and they're supposed to be giving the viewers a good show, which that leads me to wonder, are there cameras on the outside of the Enterprise? I mean, how are they filming this?
Well, there must be, right? Because we always see them like change views, like on the view screen.
True, and this looks like there may be some kind of a floating drone type camera somewhere out there, as well.
Yeah,
keeping track.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that past them.
Yeah. So I guess the teaser here, this page is setting us up that they're bringing aboard this frozen legendary individual who they're not going to reveal the guy's name just yet, but we're supposed to sit here and scratch our heads, I guess, and wonder who exactly this person is and why the Enterprise was sent to retrieve them, and what are they doing out there in space floating around in the first place?
That is an excellent question.
All questions that will be answered very shortly here as we get into the issue, but I don't want to speed past this page, Ian. If you had anything else that popped into your mind, based on the cover and then this teaser together, I think we could piece together a good bit of what's going to happen.
Right, like they've obviously found a body out in space, and like they're just out there fetching it.
Yeah,
and it's a little weird. I get the whole thing, like, oh, okay, we could have used the tractor beam. No, we're gonna drag it in ourselves, but like, it seems weird that like they're just floating out there free in space.
Yeah, not even using the shuttlecraft or anything.
Yeah. Shuttlecraft would have probably been my first choice.
Yeah.
Like that.
That might have been a good show.
But the one thing that they do get is they get the kind of bickering between McCoy and Spock.
Yeah, we're getting a little TOS-y there, for sure.
Although I I think it's Scotty that's saying, like, you're forgetting, Doctor, Vulcans are emotionless. And I'm like, I don't think McCoy would really forget that.
No, that's usually McCoy's first jab point.
Right, exactly.
On Spock. I don't think that's left his mind at this point, but I think maybe they're using that as a way to remind the reader that Vulcans are logical and emotionless.
Right.
So
he's the chief engineer and chief expositioner.
Chief expositioner. And I'd be remiss also if I didn't point out that the 4 top members of the crew are now floating around out in space. They could have sent some security guys out there to get that thing.
Right.
But,
this is an ill-advised away team.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
I don't know if you could really call it a boarding party since they're not boarding anything. But.
Yeah, there should be some sort of Starfleet protocol that you can't have that many of them on the same mission at the same time, just in case. But
let's just chuck them out the airlock.
We digress. All right, you ready to move into the rest of this issue?
Yeah.
All right. So, as we always do, we're going to kind of give you little bits of synopsis, and then we're going to stop and talk for a few minutes about each piece of this, and I guess we'll just jump right in. It starts off with the captain's log. Stardate 1806.9, a historic moment lay just ahead of us within that coffin in space, ... So we're getting a direct continuation from the teaser page here, which is sort of unlike a lot of Gold Keys. Yeah. A lot of them seem to pick story points kind of in the middle of the comic to use for those teasers, but this one actually used it as almost a preamble.
Right. It's like the pre-Act 1 teaser.
Yes, pre-Act 1. Yeah, it's a stinger. Got a comic stinger. So they get the coffin back aboard the ship, and the 4 of them go into a sealed medical type compartment in order to try to revive this Dr. Blykoff. I'm going to go Blykoff.
I think it's Blykoff.
I'm going to go Blykoff because the E is before the I, so I'm going to go Blykoff on this one.
Exactly.
And this is interesting. We have some nudity in Gold Key. They strip down to their skivvies and take what they're calling a steri bath, which I assume is kind of like delousing when you go to prison, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So they go out of their way to point out that this sterilized bath kills all external bacteria that you pick up in space.
Right.
I wouldn't think there'd be much bacteria out in space, but okay. So with other people assisting, Dr. McCoy is able to bring this Dr. Blykoff back to life. As they're opening up the coffin, kind of an energy burst flies out, and they all kind of stumble and fall over. But they kind of explain it away as just a kind of burst of built up static electricity. So they're doing a really strange thing here. They recycle Professor Blykoff's blood and send a bolt of energy. And you know, he's not waking up, of course. He had the dramatic moment, and you know,
Will he or won't he?
yeah, just as they're giving up, of course, the doctor awakens and asks for a cup of tea. So maybe a ancestor of Picard's, possibly here. But so they lift the quarantine, and the Enterprise crew members are gathering around the professor and start asking his opinions about all sorts of current events and Starfleet politics. And Dr. Blykoff asks Kirk if he can take an anonymous trip around the Earth for a few days before he's going to have to go on his press tour now that he's been reawakened. So Kirk initially refuses that request, saying the doctor is much too important to take an anonymous trip. But that provokes a really strange response from some of the crew members that are in attendance there. They start to get a bit agitated and start to demand that Kirk, get permission to take Blykoff on this little trip that he wants to take. And they're all a little surprised by the people's reaction. But strangely, Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty don't seem to be feeling this sense of anxiousness. They seem to be more normal, and everybody else is kind of getting a little more hysterical. And finally, Kirk relents and decides to get permission from what they call in Gold Key, we talked about this many times, HQ, right. Which is, I guess, a reference to Starfleet. So why don't we pull the shuttlecraft over at this point and start talking through these first few pages of the comic. And one of the things that really stands out to me on the first actual page of the comic is I love that they had to have this little sidebar or bottom bar in the second panel where there's a little asterisk next to the word cryonics, and Spock says they're talking about the coffin, and Spock says he was first major effort in cryonics with an asterisk, and then they explain what cryonics is in a separate box. Cryonics, the science of freezing live tissue for restoration at a future time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We don't see a lot of that in Gold Key.
No, I don't remember seeing that at all before. Like, a little definition sidebar kind of thing like that. Like, I think this might be the first one.
Oh, I mean, Gold Key history here. But it's funny.
Lucky dogs.
It's funny to me. It's not a term that they made up.
Right.
It's a real thing. So, I mean, I would think they would do this more with the weird terms that they coin in Star Trek to describe things. I know Roddenberry wasn't big into talking about the tech and how it all works, but still, pretty interesting stuff there.
Yeah, like what term would Gold Key have normally come up with? Like, cold hibernation, or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, I don't
something
really
that just describes what's going on.
What they would have come. Yeah, you would have thought they'd have a Gold Key term for this, but I guess the writers thought the better of it. But
what I do want to say though, why is this capsule just floating in space? This is the first major effort in cryonics, and so they just chuck his pod into space.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had the same question actually written down, and if you're not listeners, we will find out how he got out there and why he got out there. But still, the point is valid, though. I mean, you would think if you were freezing somebody with the intent of reawakening them later on, why would you shoot them into space aimlessly and have them just floating around where it's going to be really difficult to find them? And not to mention, at the time that he was frozen, I don't think they had starships.
No, but they did. I mean, the franchise, at least at that point, like we've been aware of sleeper ships. Like the Botany Bay.
Oh, sure.
Like, so we know that's at least a thing. They could have fudged with the times a little bit, and then made him like alive during that era, and shipped out on a sleeper ship, and then a ship would be a lot easier to find than just a body-sized capsule floating in the darkness of space.
And not only that, I mean, the capsule doesn't look much bigger than his actual body. I wonder how it was powered.
Right.
I would assume solar, but then, I mean, if it's just floating aimlessly in space, it could go behind something, a planetary body, and be without power for who knows how long.
And no more Dr. Blykoff.
Dr. Blykoff, Gold Key will have you know, is a Nobel Prize winner in astrophysics. Right. So we learned that about him. So we had a little bit of a background on why he was so special, quote unquote. And we'll get a little more about that as we get into the next page or two.
Yeah.
So we get a little bit of a flashback here on the next page where Dr. Blykoff is supposed to be accepting an award, but he gets kind of wrapped up in this Stop the War protest, which was very topical for the time this comic was coming out. It's obviously a very clear anti-war, anti-military establishment message to this comic. So, we see some images of Blykoff outside with some protesters, and then he winds up in a jail cell where he's kind of, I guess, recruiting people to his cause. So I think we're getting a little bit of a taste of what Dr. Blykoff was like in his lifetime, and he was, I guess, a prominent scientist and a force for peace.
Right. Kind of reminds me of Linus Pauling. Who, if our viewers, or I guess we don't have viewers, we have listeners.
Yes. Same thing.
Who, if our listeners are not familiar with, was a two-time Nobel Prize winner. He was a major force in chemistry. Like, if you've ever taken chemistry and you had to learn about electronegativity, he was the guy who figured that out. But then he also won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work on the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And so, I definitely get like shades of Linus Pauling with this guy.
Yeah. And there's one specific line in here that sounded very Star Trek to me. And that Dr. Blykoff says, if people forsake science, they leave the door open for an unchecked military.
That is a very nicely Star Trekian message.
Yeah. I immediately thought, wow, this really does sound like a TOS episode.
Yeah.
To me, and I maybe I'm off base here, but they don't show a lot of this. But did they just lock up a bunch of peaceful protesters?
Yeah, what's that about, right?
Right. It seems very odd to me. They don't look like they're violent. They're just chanting and holding up signs.
Have, like, just they're chilling out there. Like, Blykoff's got a smile on his face, it looks like. Everyone else, they're just like really enraptured by him.
Yeah, they are. And you know what else stuck out to me here a little bit though in this lead-in portion is that usually Kirk and Spock are a little bit better informed about human history. They don't seem to be all that knowledgeable about this guy.
Well, Spock is, because
a bit.
He's the one kind of narrating this flashback. If you look back on the previous page, the first panel of the flashback, that's his head in the capsule there, or in the caption. Oh wait, no. Oh my goodness, I was incorrect. That is Captain Kirk. Boy, it is a good thing they wrote everyone's names on their helmets.
Yeah, right. Oh man.
But so yeah, it was actually Kirk then giving the narration of this time that he was supposed to be accepting the Nobel Prize, and instead got locked up because he was protesting peacefully.
Yeah.
In Stockholm, I guess.
Yep.
You know that dictatorial Sweden. You know, they're just real bastards over there.
Oh man,
they hate peace.
Yeah, the cops are very militaristic over there, and so we move past this, and we're getting into the naked scenes here.
Yeah, that. Oh boy.
Yeah, this is a really weird sequence, and I like that it seems to be Scotty who's giving the order that everyone has to get into this steri-bath thing, and then we actually see them in the steri-bath, and it looks like they're in pain,
right.
or being tickled,
or like just took a lot of ecstasy, and they're at a rave, and
yeah, it almost doesn't look like a freak out. It looks like a little bit like a freak out. Yeah, so they're decontaminated, I guess, which is different. I guess this is a different area of the ship too. So I guess we're seeing something here for the first time.
Well, there's that
in Gold Key. So let's see.
Like I did think that it was interesting that they had this idea of like, you know, a place where they have to sterilize, which we would see many decades later in Enterprise, which I remember a lot of the time the fans didn't like the whole sterilization pod thing, but you know, the decontamination room, it's an idea that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
They just maybe didn't execute it as well in this comic.
Yeah, this is very peculiar, but let's see, where were we? Oh, so we're moving through here a little bit more, and we get to the point here where they're cracking open the coffin, the capsule, and we see the burst of energy that we were talking about before, and there's a little note here that says the flash explosion injures little more than their pride.
Yeah,
and strange word choice.
Well, yeah, I mean, whenever I get zapped by static electricity, I definitely feel a hit to my pride, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. You kidding me?
I mean,
it's embarrassing.
Yeah,
it's embarrassing. But he does wake up and asks for his cup of tea. Let's see, what else? So, did you notice that the words nanosecond is misspelled? It's NANNO.
Yep. Why? They were doing so good. They had cryonics right. They had astrophysics as an actual field. Like, these guys were on it.
They were on it.
No.
Yeah, no. And one McCoy saying, "Wait 1 nanosecond, you faithless fools." It's more strange word choices. But it's Gold Key for you.
Yeah, the Gold Key Scotty is, I see what they're trying to do, but like nobody talks like that, and even Scotty doesn't talk like that.
No, exactly. So we're moving on. So here we got the shot of him laying in sickbay, and Uhura's in there. So they're asking him about all kinds of Starfleet, restating the Starfleet ideals, which I thought was kind of an interesting touch, since Gold Key in the past has been pretty disconnected for most of the time from Starfleet in general. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of nice that they're talking about the non-interference policy and balance of individual freedom and government power. That's kind of a nice touch for this. It made it feel much more TOS to me. What about you?
It definitely did. But it did also strike me as weird that they would be asking him about this when he just woke up. You know?
Yeah, literally just woke up, hasn't even had his tea yet.
Right. And they're like, what do you think of our society that you haven't even seen yet or heard anything about?
And he's kind of he's asking them to kind of slow down a little bit. He's like, wait a second. He's like, I don't know anything about your worlds. So, yeah, I find it interesting that they expected him to be up to speed that quickly and have an educated opinion to share with them.
And they all seem like disappointed that he doesn't know.
Yeah, they're like, wait a minute. Hasn't he had a chance to review all of the ship's historical logs by now? We roll the monitor over for him like we did for Khan.
Right, looking at all the technical manuals and history books and can't see any of that here though.
No, he's not studying up yet. But
Nope.
So let's see. Any other points? The shirt colors are pretty good.
Yeah,
I like that they're getting, except for Sulu in a green shirt is a little off, but
yeah. There's a few people there in
green shirts. I'll give them a pass.
Shirts, yeah, I think those are kind of meant to be like the orange shirts that aren't, the gold shirts that aren't command, if that makes sense.
Yep.
That seems to be my thing, and then that way you can visually still tell Kirk apart from them. I think that's why they're doing it. I don't know.
You might be right on that. They want to make sure the primary characters are immediately recognizable.
Yeah.
Not going so far as to put their names on their shirts, but at least they had them on the helmets.
Right.
Well, I don't know about you, Ian, but if Star Trek has taught me anything, it is people who wake up from stasis or cryogenic sleep always have some sort of ulterior motives.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm expecting this to go south.
Yeah, this is going to go pear-shaped
pretty quickly. Anything that you want to point out before we start moving on? I think we got through about page about 8-ish or so.
Yeah. I just want to go back to that, like the steri rays again. Like, it is such a weird thing. Like, he even says like, oh, we're gonna go into this decontamination room and like get these rays that can tickle, and like that's why everyone's laughing,
I guess,
panel. But like, I just remember reading that and just being like, okay, I just read the explanation of like what is going on in the next panel and I still don't get it.
No, it's a completely unnecessary sequence as well, because it has no bearing on anything else that happens in the story. So again, and panels we could have used for more backstory or more fleshing out of the plot.
And that's a really common theme that we've found, I think, in Gold Key, is that they often have like a lot of these kind of wasted panels, and then the ending ends up feeling rushed because they ran out of pages to properly pace the story out in. Yeah. And I think without getting too far ahead, I think that this is a good example of that, because there's a lot of stuff in this issue that just kind of jump forward because they've only got what, like 22, 24 pages.
Yep.
And it's like, well, if you just cut the cruft, you can tell a properly paced story. I promise you, it's a thing.
It is. Well, I have a feeling that we're going to see another abridged short ending on this one. I'm predicting that here and now, as you have. So to get to that ending, let's see what's going on. Going back up with Captain Kirk, who got approval for 5 days of anonymous travel for
Amazing,
Dr. Blykoff.
Amazing.
That's unbelievable. How he must have pulled some weight, called in some favors.
Yeah.
So he and the other top brass officers on the ship will be escorting Dr. Blykoff on this trip around the world, and a bunch of crew members are rejoicing and cheering Kirk on and singing for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." Again, the emotions are running high, and Spock is kind of giving it the kind of the side eye, trying to think of what the heck's going on here. So a little foreshadowing moment yet again. So we jump to Earth, and they're in Paris, and they're standing near the Eiffel Tower, which now has a huge ball or sphere erected on the top of it. And Kirk goes ahead and explains that it's part of a worldwide system to protect from invasion from space, and they're calling it the Earth Defense Screen, or EDS for short. So they visit the Statue of Liberty, the pyramids, and some mountains, and there's these EDS things all over all of these monuments and famous locations. So Kirk reiterates that the EDS is fundamental to Earth's security. And so they get to the last day of this anonymous tour, and Dr. Blykoff is recognized on the street by a journalist, so he's kind of forced into doing a full press conference, and in which he criticizes the modern world for being loveless and cold and not having a heart anymore. So he's really affected by the defacement, if you will, of these monuments. So, of course, everyone is shocked. They're like, what are you talking about, dude? You just got back. How do you know? You've just kind of been waltzing around for a few days. How can you say this about us? And his words resonate, and the story kind of makes its way around the world. And at his next public reception, which happens to be in Rome, Blykoff calls for the people around the world to abandon their science and bring back love, and ripping down the EDS system. So Spock and Kirk start to get really suspicious about this, and Spock has a feeling of what's going on, something strange. So he says that he's feeling something. He had the same feeling aboard the ship when the crew was acting strangely, and this is more of a thing on a mass scale. So later on, in the chambers of what they call the Supreme Counselor, I guess this is the elders that make the decisions in the government on Earth now. Right. The chancellor of that group tells Kirk that the council doesn't care for what Blykoff is saying, and they want to have a meeting with him, tell him to stop. But Blykoff is able to somehow convince the chancellor of his views, and the council becomes completely aligned with what Blykoff is trying to do. So again, Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise are a little bit taken aback by this, and they're still escorting Blykoff because his tour is not quite over. So they visit Mount Rushmore, and Blykoff springs his plan to destroy all of this, what he's calling the spheres of hate, which are these EDS system spheres. So we're at another rally in Mariana City, which I assume is in the Marianas Trench somewhere.
Right below where I was just at earlier this year.
So 30,000 feet below the Pacific Ocean. They have a city down there now, which is interesting in itself. And the Doctor is telling this gigantic crowd of people that they need to get rid of the EDS, but not in a violent way. He doesn't want them to resort to destruction, and he rather tells them that they must destroy it in a very humane fashion, and no one should get hurt during it. So the audience is whipped into a crazed frenzy, and we'll pull the ship over again here to kind of go through some of this stuff. Ian, what are your thoughts on this EDS Earth defense screen, and why they added all of these globes onto historical monuments? But I thought it was kind of interesting because in 2009, the first Kelvin timeline movie, the big bad Nero villain wants the codes to get through Earth's defense system. So I thought it was kind of interesting that we get a little bit of that same concept here.
Right. It is very odd, though, in this comic. Like, as you were pointing out, like, why are these seemingly only on, landmarks? Right?
Yeah,
like, wouldn't something like that you would want, to be kind of, like, equidistantly placed around the world, to have a more efficient field or whatever? Like, it just seems weird to arbitrarily, like, let's throw one on the Eiffel Tower, let's throw one on Mount Rushmore, those just seem like odd places.
You would think that you'd want to install these military devices in military installations where they could be protected, right? In case somebody, an enemy agent, were to get onto the planet and just show up at a historic landmark and take out half your defense system. Seems a little short-sighted to me.
Yeah, and it also then strikes me as weird that, like, he is just immediately like, oh, these are spheres of hate, as he says. And it's like, well, no, it's just like a defensive screen, like, having a shield doesn't mean that you're, like, a soulless, cruel monster, Yeah,
I thought that was a really strange reaction, that and almost misguided reaction that the Doctor had to defensive technology. It's not like it was a battery of missiles pointed towards the sky.
Right. Yeah, it's not like, like missiles full of VX gas that could only have one purpose, which is to kill other sentient beings. You know, like
Right.
these are just like shields. I would assume even that this kind of protective shield would even be useful for, like, you know, say an asteroid's bearing down on the planet or something. You know,
Yeah.
like that seems really useful. Well, who would have a problem with that?
I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, Dr. Blykoff does. Well, I can deduce by this comic that Lex Luthor must be president of the United States because they filled in New York Harbor so they could build more homes and things because land is at a premium. So that's definitely a Lex Luthor plot line.
Yeah. And that was something that I thought was really interesting. That a couple things on that page, actually. Like, one was, like you were just talking about, how they filled in New York Harbor. Like nowadays, when we see depictions of, you know, New York in science fiction, and I'm thinking specifically of The Expanse is what the show's called. I remember them having, like, you know, they had to build seawalls around Liberty Island because, you know, sea levels had risen with global warming and everything. And so it's interesting here that they're, in a way, a bit more optimistic about it. And it, just for a moment, I was like, that would be interesting to be able to just walk from Manhattan to the Statue of Liberty.
Wouldn't it? Not have to wait for the ferry?
Yeah.
That would be great. That would be great. Oh, and let's not forget the other modern convenience they've installed. They have an air-conditioned dome over the Taj Mahal now in this comic.
Because you have to.
Yeah. Oh, I thought that was interesting. But you know what? One thing, I know we poke a lot of fun at these comics, but one thing that I really liked about this is it retreads that old argument about humanity being lost to technology. And that's something that we still talk about today, and it's still a really relevant message with, I mean, you're seeing all of this. I mean, everybody's face is buried in their phones or tablets all the time, and, you know, people get into car accidents because they're texting and driving, and you know, we're getting consumed by social media, and it's influencing, you know, society. It's influencing elections, and the overall direction of pretty much everything right now is subject to the whim of these huge, you know, corporations that create this software that everybody gets hooked on. So I like that they're talking about this stuff back in 1976, just like we're talking about it now.
Right. It seems to be kind of a recurring theme with just science fiction in general. Like, you know, the from, you know, the will mechanization make, you know, human work obsolete, and will, you know, like what happens to us psychologically when, you know, more advanced technology becomes like ubiquitous. And I think that's it's a good theme for them to explore. Absolutely.
And they even go a little further. And there's a panel in here. I'm trying to find what page it's on, where they're showing. Oh, here it is. It's on page 11. 10. I think it's 11. Yeah, it's 11. That shows a television broadcast talking about Blykoff's message. And they talk about the news addicted universe.
Yeah,
gobbles up the Blykoff interview, and it's nice. There's a little print edition newspaper in there too. So someone's still printing stuff,
right?
In the future,
it's like the last print newspaper on the planet.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of a nice touch, but you know, I think that kind of sums up what we've become today. You know, the news and social media addicted society, or even the globe, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was actually one of the nice things about being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, was like being cut off from that. Having, like, you know, chance to wake up and not like freak out.
Yeah.
Because I'm reading the news. You know?
Exactly.
Unplugging. So, yeah, absolutely. I do want to say, excuse me. So Blykoff's whole thing about how, like, you know, science and technology have taken over and made you more cold. While that is, I definitely agree, like a good theme for them to explore, it does directly contradict him from that flashback in the earlier part when we were talking about, remember, he was in the thing and he was saying like he was in the prison, and he was saying, if you reject science, then basically the military is going to take over and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems like he's just completely flipped on that since he woke up, and that is interesting. It's something that I don't want to jump too far ahead, but they do explain things in a way that kind of makes sense, but it's still, I remember when I was reading it, it was definitely jarring.
Yeah.
At first.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to mention. So the panel right after the Statue of Liberty, where they're in Egypt, and he comments on how they've been reclaiming the desert.
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting because, one, I mean, it would be really sweet if we were able to, de-desertify a lot of the Sahara,
Yeah, almost terraform.
Right.
The desert into a livable space.
It calls back to, of all things, the cage. If you remember,
right,
when Pike is in the Tylosian's prison, and they're sending him to places, and he ends up going to the Mojave, which is apparently where he was from, and the matte painting of the Mojave in the background is lush and green, which is very much not like the Mojave of today, right?
No.
And so I thought it was like a nice little parallel.
Yeah. No, it definitely was. I thought that was one of the standout frames in this one section we've just been going through. Some of the stuff was interesting. I mean, the paved over Hudson River was interesting, but I found it strange that they didn't have one of those globes on top of the pyramid, though. I would have thought they'd put one of the EDS globes up there. And and the reception in Rome is in the Colosseum. Yeah,
I have issues with that.
Yeah, as do I. Unless they somehow repaired it or just I don't know, made it so that it wouldn't be damaged anymore by being used this way. It obviously mounted some lights on it.
Right.
But
which I think they have actual lights on it now, but it's not like that now because it's such an old structure. Like they're, they take tourists in, but they're still like, you have to be really careful about like, keeping the place preserved because it's thousands of years old, and like stone like that just has a way of kind of falling apart over time.
It does. Well, naturally it's going to crumble, as we've seen it doing all our lifetimes and the lifetimes that came before ours. These structures just degrade over time. So
and so it's just interesting that they would hold any kind of rally or conference or anything like that there. It really strikes me as weird. And also, if I'm going to be like judgy to this future Earth society, it's ill-advised, and it's a bit irresponsible.
I agree. There could have been a much better conference center, I'm sure, around there that they could have used.
Yeah.
So any other things you wanted to point out before we start moving into part 2 of this comic?
No, those were really the main points that I wanted to hit. I just it is interesting. I'll close this section out by just saying that it is interesting having this view into the future of Earth, right? Like that's just something that we don't see a whole lot of, and it's always interesting to see different people's take on how the future is going to be.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting view into the writer's mind, and seeing how the writer sees the projected future, and what the issues of that day are going to be. So it's an interesting. Let's see where the story goes from here.
Let's.
Yes. So Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy are meeting in an undersea hotel in the Mariana City. And Spock suggests that Blykoff is using some sort of mass hypnosis through radio waves. That's how he's charming everybody. And, of course, McCoy is wondering why. And Kirk comes up with a theory that, and stay with me here, guys, because this gets a little weird.
Yep.
This is not where I would have gone with this theory if it was me making it. But, okay, this is Kirk. He's seen a lot of stuff. So Kirk's theory is that Dr. Blykoff's capsule was intercepted in space, which I guess is one of the things they should have thought about before they launched him into space. But just saying,
Just saying.
Intercepted by aliens who knew that he would eventually be returned to Earth. How they knew that, I don't know, but apparently Kirk does. So the aliens decided to use Dr. Blykoff as a sort of Manchurian candidate, or the comic calls him a time bomb. Right. And they performed an operation that essentially removed his brain and replaced it with some sort of a computer that they programmed that would give him the ability to hypnotize others and convert them into his followers so that he could convince the people of Earth to lower the defense screen. Wow. Pretty far-fetched plot.
Like, where did he come up with that?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's
just intuited this.
Amazing to me. But I
don't know where.
No idea. But Kirk's got a lot of wisdom. He's been around. He's seen a lot of things. He's
been around the block.
He's fought a lot of computers in his day, so he can spot the computers when they pop up. So Scotty, of course, asked the logical question: why are they the only 4 people who are not affected by the hypnosis capabilities of Dr. Blykoff? And here goes another insane theory. But McCoy says that he believes that the shock that came out of the capsule when they opened it was actually a quote unquote immunity ray left by the aliens themselves as a safeguard so that they wouldn't be hypnotized when they came back to check on the space capsule at some mythical point in the future. So, and then he goes on to say that the alien civilization was likely destroyed before they could come back and make that final, quote unquote, final check on Dr. Blykoff. So this is like wild theory 101 going on here.
Just insanity.
I mean, there's no indication in this comic up till now that this would be the case at all.
Right. Like, what evidence do you have for aliens in the first place? Like, they just have supposed them not only as being these conspirators, but also they figure, well, and they probably also blew themselves up. Yeah,
they must have. That has to be the only plausible explanation for any of this. And that's why the aliens, and who knows why they would go back to check on them and open up the capsule anyway. But still, okay, well, we're going to go with this because the comic is going with this theory. So, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, it turns out to be right somehow, mysteriously. Yeah. So they're in New Chicago, quote unquote, New Chicago, and Blykoff and the Enterprise crew are going to board a rocket that will take them to New Jerusalem. Everything's new.
Everything's new. It's like Futurama, where they just build the new cities on top of the old ones.
Yeah, everything's brand new. New. So Dr. Blykoff, when they get to Jerusalem, is going to deliver his big worldwide speech to get the people of the world to finally destroy the Earth defense screen system. McCoy bribes a security guard to set up an X-ray machine, or an old X-ray machine, as a quote-unquote security measure, so that he can check for the presence of this theorized computer brain inside of Blykoff's head. But as they approach this scanner, Blykoff becomes erratic and refuses to go through it, and Kirk gives him a pass and uses his captaincy authority to tell the guard to stand aside, essentially.
Yeah, he's pulling all the strings.
Yeah. So, and this little interaction is enough for the Enterprise crew to be convinced that their theory is correct. So, very scientific way to test this. Yes. Very scientific.
He's afraid of the X-ray machine. It must be aliens.
This is the interesting part to me. This was the interesting part because I'm wondering, like, okay, so does if Blykoff does in fact have a computerized brain programmed by aliens inside of his head, but if he's not aware of that and he still thinks he's his normal self, why would the X-ray machine freak him out in the first place?
Right.
But if it makes me think maybe he is aware of it. I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, so this whole situation has taken a turn for the weird, and I think that, like going over it again just now, I think he is in on it. Just given his reactions, like a few pages down.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, that's insane, right? Like that their whole hypothesizing, the crew's hypothesizing is, it imagines these aliens with this conspiracy and a whole, thing just out of nowhere. And then they conclude just because he's afraid of the X-ray machine that they must be right. That is mind-blowing.
Well, very, very scientific ways they came up with the theory and even better ways to test it. So I love the fact that McCoy's like, giving this guy a meal ticket or something for hauling out the old system, a little piece of paper in his hand. Because we know that they don't use paper money, do they, in the future? No. So what's he bribing him with? I thought that was interesting in itself.
Don't spend your food card all at once.
Yeah, there you go. You can go to the craft table. Here you go. Take my voucher.
Yeah.
There is on page, was it 17? Yeah, page 17 has a really neat brain in a jar panel.
Oh, yeah.
I really like brains in jars. I don't know about you.
That is a genre that has, it went away before we had really run through like all of the brain in jar situations.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the classic 80s comedy, The Man with Two Brains.
Yeah.
Where they had tons of brains in jars. But this is kind of cool. I like the fact that they went so far as to actually draw out the theory coming to life before your eyes with, Kirk's disembodied head off to the left of the panel as he describes in great detail the aliens and what they look like and what their spacesuits look like. And
right. Their ships.
Yeah, their ships and their operating room where they're removing his brain and very fascinating stuff. Kirk has a very vivid imagination.
Yeah, I mean, he's like one of his captions says, "We can assume that a sophisticated operation was performed." It's like, can you assume that?
Well, you know what? Let's examine this for a second. Kirk did witness Dr. McCoy reimplanting Spock's brain in his head. So it's possible. He's seen it happen before.
Wow. I never thought Spock's brain would ever be able to be used to win an argument.
Yeah, we've got a Spock's brain tie-in here, guys.
Wow.
This is I'm telling you, you're getting some
treading new ground.
Really great TOS connections here. But I'm going to go ahead and say that those aliens, maybe they were involved in creating that machinery that helped McCoy to get the knowledge to reimplant Spock's brain.
Oh man,
maybe we got a really close link.
Oh, that would actually make a lot of sense, right? Because
wouldn't it?
Remember, like their whole civilization, was destroyed or whatever, and so were the people on the planet name that I can't remember at the moment. Man, I must be rusty on trivia.
Yeah, you and me both. I'm getting a little bit fuzzy on all the locations, but I should remember this too. But the women,
it was like a
lived underground. Yeah. Sorry, listeners, we're a little rusty.
Yeah, if you came here looking for Trek trivia, tune in next episode when I hope will be a lot better.
We'll get back into the swing. We will. Oh man, you know what? I will say though, and we're having a lot of fun joking around about this plot, but I'm going to say that I really kind of enjoy this. It is really convenient. There's a lot of plot convenience here, but I like that overall it's a cohesive storyline that ties back to the beginning of the issue with the explosion and, seemingly throwaway detail actually become something meaningful later on in the story, which is that's a good bit of storytelling there. It's a good hallmark of storytelling in my book.
I have to agree. Yeah, it is a tight story. It's certainly got its conceptual mores, but it is a pretty tight story. And then as I've kind of kept referencing, like the further you get along in the story, the more you're able to be like, oh, that confusing thing back then, now it makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. Because I was thinking to myself that, well, that little explosion thing obviously didn't hurt them at all, and just maybe
except their pride.
And I kind of like the fact that they when that panel came around where they did that little reveal, I was like, oh, okay, all right, that was kind of satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do make a lot of fun of it, but if you were, I mean, let's be honest, probably a kid in the mid 1970s, and you were reading this comic, this would be pretty cool,
Yeah, I agree. Let's see, where did we leave off? Oh, they're arriving at New Jerusalem, and Blykoff has the Enterprise guys taken into custody. So he says he suspects that they're going to try to stop him from delivering his final impassioned speech. So he begins doing his broadcast to the entire world, and again calls for people to destroy the EDS spheres. And there are mobs forming already all around the world, and they're getting ready to enact Blykoff's plan, but non-violently. But thankfully, as always, Kirk and his cohorts are able to escape the guards, and they sneak back inside the studio during the speech, and all over the world, people are watching as Kirk confronts the evil, computerized corpse, Dr. Blykoff. That's directly from the comics, guys. I didn't make that up. Yep. So Blykoff attacks Kirk, but Kirk has a kind of this large metallic disc in his hand, and he's calling it a magnetic eraser, which kind of looks a little bit like the Atavachron when it's mounted to the wall.
Yeah.
But he goes out of his way to explain that it's harmless to the brains made of blood and tissue, but deadly to an electronic brain. And just then, Dr. B collapses on the floor. His brain has been destroyed. And just like that, the citizens of Earth are released from his spell and stop attacking the EDS spheres and are confused as to where they are. So apparently the mind control was strong enough to make people completely forget themselves. So
suddenly in Israel.
Yeah, save the day they did. So we get the typical TOS attempt at comedy here at the end, where Scotty, later aboard the Enterprise, everyone's back, everyone's happy. Scotty says, imagine all that time we were the only independent minds on Earth. Spock says, actually, Mr. Scott, I've always found your mind to be completely independent of logic. And McCoy laughs, the bell is back. Ding, ding, ding. That was a zinger. So another really, really quick wrap up. We get to the end in about a page and a half, not even.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's wow. Well, I guess it's a satisfying ending in a way.
Yeah, and it's like the plot and everything was really dense, and so I can see why they would have had a hard time, getting it in only 24 pages on this one. They could have cut a few panels here and there, like the Sterabath scene, and maybe the tour didn't have to be as long, but I can see how it would have just been tough to condense all of this into just 24 pages.
Yeah, this may have been could maybe have benefited from being a two-parter even.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that we're still not in the place in comics, or at least in Gold Key, where they're going to do, multi-part, story arcs across several issues. Like that's so commonplace today. In fact, I don't see nearly as many one-off comic books anymore that aren't part of some greater narrative.
Right. Exactly. It's pretty much taken over in a lot of mediums. I mean, serialized television.
Oh God, yeah. That's the big thing now. Bingeable bingeable serial television shows are all the rage.
Yeah.
You know, there's not much episodic stuff coming out. I mean, what Black Mirror?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like all the major popular shows nowadays are all, you know, long story arcs that last an entire season. I mean, even Star Trek's gone that way with Discovery.
Yeah. But this was 1976 and different time.
Yeah,
Very different time.
I kind of still like the standalone story. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. I agree. I do like episodic stuff as well. But there are a few things going on in this last sequence.
Oh, yeah.
And they are definitely worthy of comment. Let me scroll back enough. Okay, so after the brain in the jar, he's going... Okay, I'm going to do some dead air for a minute. I'm trying to find the spot. Okay, yes. So, he's getting ready to do his thing in New Chicago, right? And where he's proposing to dismantle the EDS. And it is interesting. I laughed when I first read that our intrepid crew is having this meeting to, you know, kind of get to the bottom of what's behind Dr. Blykoff. And then Blykoff walks in, and I really liked, you know, what is Mr. Scott, says Blykoff. And then Scotty's like, Mr. Spock was claiming that roses grow 20 feet tall on Vulcan.
Yeah, I actually had a note about that Vulcan has the same flower species as Earth, roses and orchids.
Right, you know, like, well, they got teddy bears, right? So, but I love that Spock is even, like, going along with it. He's like, more like orchids, Mr. Scott. Roses, come on.
That's actually kind of a funny moment. I like that they threw that in there.
Right, and it was just it charmed the heck out of me.
Another nice little touch that I didn't mention while we were talking that I thought was kind of cute was when McCoy was bribing that guard. He referred to his bribe as a donation to the Port Inspectors Association.
Right.
So they have organizations for friggin' everything now.
Yeah. Well, you know, they may be living under a strange, you know, dictatorship of, you know, the Earth Council or whatever.
Yeah, the Supreme Council.
But hey, at least we got some unions still.
Yeah, the unions are still going strong, and the Enterprise crew supports them.
Yeah.
So as should all of you. Should all support the unions, man. What else? Oh, and let's see, on page 20, I like the reference to the device is a videotape erasing machine.
Right.
It looks like the Atavachron, but it's specifically for erasing videotapes so they can be used again.
Right. And that is an oddly specific use for such a generic shape.
Right.
You know, like you can't just have any old big magnet, right? Like,
right.
You know, I'm assuming that the tapes they're talking about are magnetic tapes. Like
you would assume
back then, you know. So yeah, like, couldn't you just, like, I don't know, you could even just put it on top of a speaker. Right?
Yeah,
it'd be fine.
Yeah, exactly. And another nice detail about that machine is apparently you can rip the disc part off the wall and it still works.
Right. Because presumably it's just a big magnet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I also, you know, like the old science fiction, like I would say, like pre Star Trek, really, where everything was rockets. You know, that kind of Flash Gordon episode.
Oh yeah.
Of science fiction, like that really like came to mind when they were at O'Hare Rocket Port.
Yes, O'Hare Rocket Port.
So they're in Chicago still, and instead of, you know, regular like O'Hare Airport, it's O'Hare Rocket Port, because no, we're in the future. We use rockets.
Yeah. We're gonna keep the name of the airport the same though. It's, you know, it's history.
Right.
We gotta keep it O'Hare. But
as everyone knows, it was named after a famous rabbit named Bucky.
Captain Bucky O'Hare.
That's the one.
Uh-huh. Yes, I remember that cartoon very well.
Yeah.
Another flashback. What else do you got for the wrap-up, Ian?
Oh, man. Also on that page, like, this is where I start thinking that the Doctor was in on it, because his behavior becomes just, like, unhinged. Like, we're in that panel where they're at O'Hare Rocketport, or in that page, rather, and he's going off about, it's a total invasion of privacy. How dare you? Do you know who I am? Do you?
Yeah.
Do you? And he's like just going nutso about it, and that was what made me think that he was in on it, like that he knew that he had a robot brain, that he was, in Captain Kirk's words, a robot zombie.
Yes. No, I you know what? Yeah, I think you're right. Looking at this again, I think you're spot on. That freak out moment he has with the guard, he's definitely trying to use his status to get himself out of that situation. So that does kind of smell like he knows that the jig would be up should he go through.
It was
either that, or he could have been more creative and figured out a way to explain away the X-ray machine detecting metal in his head.
Right.
But you say, hey, I had a brain injury when I was younger, and I have a steel plate in my head.
Yeah.
We all do. Everybody has a steel plate in their head. Come on.
Standard thing now.
Why not?
So, probably the last kind of commentary that I have on this issue, as far as their prognostication of the future, is that it's interesting. It's one of those like times when they're just trying to be like, global, right? Mm-hmm. But they go to Bombay, which nowadays is called Mumbai, right? But like they go to Bombay, and that's like, it kind of reminds me of there was an episode of the original series where Chekhov is talking about Leningrad, which now has reverted to its pre-Soviet Union name of St. Petersburg, right? But like that was like a miss, but it made sense for them to assume that would carry on at the time, because it just seems like that's just the Soviet Union is just going to be like part of the future, I guess. And obviously it wasn't, and so it's interesting also that then they kept that old name for that. It's just those little misses of prognostication are always interesting to just like note. Like I always see them, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I like it. It's interesting too that they choose to use the new moniker for a couple of locations, such as New Chicago and New Jerusalem, but they didn't use the new moniker for other locations. They went with just the existing name.
Right. And then it was a little weird when they are in Bombay and they get thrown in prison or detention or whatever they called it. But and then they just randomly dress up to get out of prison. And I just have this, like, I'm trying to imagine they just put on some costumes and then like, yep, no, we are gonna perfectly blend in India here. Scotty McCoy and Kirk and Spock. Like, maybe not. Like,
yeah, especially their faces are exposed.
Yeah, and they're kind of like really famous at this point. Like back on Earth. I think they would just be like, "Oh, hey, what's up, Kirk? Why are you wearing that outfit?" Like they would just instantly recognize him. I would think.
Yeah, where did they get the clothes from? Did they disrobe the guards?
Yeah, well, seems to be a lot of that going on in this comic.
Yeah, it certainly is. Kind of a throwback to the naked scene from earlier. Well, all in all, I think if I had to give this an essential or non-essential vote, I think I'm going to lean a little more towards the essential side. Really, not necessarily because of the story or the characters, but the fact that we're getting a lot of Earth moments in the future, and we're seeing, you know, what society is like in the time of TOS on Earth, seeing a lot of, you know, famous cities and landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and Mount Rushmore and the pyramids and the Colosseum. I think that's pretty cool, and if not ambitious for this comic to do that. And, you know, I think there's a lot to talk about, and I think it's worth reading. It for me, this issue, as much as we joked and ragged about some of the stuff that's in it, I think that it in quality level of Gold Key, this is a bit higher quality than most. It's no Mummies of Hatia 7, right. But
it's also no Tree People.
No. Yes, this is in my estimation one of the very good Gold Key issues. It seems the story is cohesive, although, I mean, it's a little far-fetched, but a lot of Star Trek episodes were in TOS. So not out of the realm of possibility for me to buy what's going on and the robot brain thing and all of that. So, you know, our only real complaint is the tightness of the ending, really. And, you know, there's some wasted panels early on they could have used, but I think we say that just about every issue. So, Ian, what are your final thoughts and your essentialness of this?
So I would also put it as essential. And my reasoning behind that is, like, if you're going to be going through the Gold Key comics, part of what I think you should be doing is, like, getting the kind of historical context of when these comics were made and what else even existed when these comics were made, right? Like, we talk a lot about, you know, early Star Trek fandom and how, you know, it was really kind of a Wild West at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in terms of content. And so this is an issue where, like you were saying, you know, you get to see what's on Earth and, like, all that kind of stuff. And you even get a little bit of, like, Earth history in there. And that's a sort of thing that was pretty rare.
Interesting.
And because of that, it makes a kind of milestone. Like, if you were going to read one of the first depictions of Earth in Star Trek, this is what you're going to be reading.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So don't miss out on this if you want that proper historical context and want to have, like, a clear idea of what Star Trek fiction, you know, was like in that interregnum between, you know, while the series was still in syndication and the movie hadn't come out yet and all that. So I'm saying essential.
Yeah. Oh, great. Awesome. So we agree on this one. And I like that we both kind of had the same reasons for calling it essential. I mean, thinking back on TOS, and the only times we saw Earth were in the past, or Earth parallel planets and societies where, you know, we saw Nazi Germany rise again on an alien world, but we did not see anything about, you know, present day Earth society in TOS. So this is, you know, probably your earliest exposure in the Star Trek universe to present day Earth to them.
Yeah, and I seem to recall reading, it was like an early treatment for the series or something like that, or maybe it was in the Making of Star Trek, the Stephen Whitfield book. I seem to recall that being one of the things that Roddenberry wanted to avoid on the series was going back to Earth. And, you know, so that he could avoid the, you know, whole, what's the word I'm looking for? Crap. So that he could avoid the whole question of, you know, explaining, like, well, what economic system ended up taking over in the future, and what, you know, how do people live in a way that seems realistically futuristic while also, you know, like, all of that stuff he wanted to avoid. And so that's why you don't end up seeing that until this comic.
Yeah. Exactly. So, well, this is another, the medium itself allows them to do things that they may not have been able to pull off live action, back in those times. So that's why the Star Trek, the animated series, and the comics are able to do so many things that we didn't see in TOS. It's kind of neat to think about that way. And I like the fact that the drawn media, as it were, allows Star Trek to expand beyond itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes reading these so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that you just captured it for me right there. I've said it before too, that this is one of the reasons that or probably the primary reason I like reading these comics and talking about them, because, there's so much interesting stuff in there, quality being as it is, there's still so much material in here to discover and to talk through. So, so glad we're back on track, man, and looking forward to the next issue. Just for you guys out there who are listening to Drawing Trek, let you guys know we are going to maintain a monthly schedule. So we'll be dropping episodes once a month, every month, still continuing on with the Gold Key comic series. We have quite a few left to go. So we're not, I think we're near about the halfway point at this point, or a little bit beyond the halfway point at this point. So we'll be doing Gold 61. Key for the foreseeable future. Yeah, 60. And we'll probably be moving on to, I think, the newspaper comics after these, I think, is the current plan, right?
Yeah, newspaper comics, and then we were going to check out those British Star Trek comics that came out around the time of the motion picture.
Yeah. We have we have those in a physical edition coming to us, so look out for the coverage. We'll figure out how we're going to cover all these, but Drawing Trek will be here for you guys, and we hope all of you are back on with us, and we'll be here for the rest of our ride.
Yes.
Any closing thoughts, Ian, before we sign off?
No. Actually, I pretty much said it all. In fact,
all right.
If there weren't more comics, I mean, this episode would have summed up everything nicely.
Yes. So where can people find you now that you're back on dry land?
Well, if you want, you can follow me on Twitter. But honestly, ever since Twitter changed their API and kind of broke Tweetbot, I haven't really been using Twitter a whole lot.
Yeah.
But sometimes I have brain droppings on there, and if you're interested in reading them, you can.
All right. So
did I say at Ian128K is the Twitter handle?
Good old at Ian128K, and I am still Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter. Though I'm not really around Twitter too much, but if you send me a DM, I will get it, or if you mention me, I'll see it pop up. But other than, you can find us on the tricordertransmissions.com or facebook.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, and the show is at drawing_trek on the Twitter, I believe, is our show's handle. So keep an eye on that.
There's no underscore.
Oh, did we get the one without the underscore finally?
I think we did.
Okay, so it's just at DrawingTrek on Twitter. So good. Underscores are pesky sometimes.
Yes.
But you can follow us there for all the latest Drawing Trek news and find out when our upcoming releases are coming out. And also, for you patrons who might be listening, you will get these episodes in an unedited form earlier. So usually a few days before it goes live for the general public. So keep your eyes on the Patreon feed for that, and you'll get all of our flubs and dead air moments that we've had in this one. But all right, so this is Jeff and Ian signing off from Drawing Trek, and we'll see you guys next time.
Live long and prosper.